Today we're going to be looking at negative indices. So this is our learning intention for today. So if you wouldn't mind, first of all, making sure that you write that in your diaries. Our learning intention is for negative indices. Negative indice law is this one here. So highlight this in your notebook. Notice that the indice is a negative. Not the whole number, not the base number, but the negative indice. What we don't like when we're working with indices is having that negative indice. Now it has happened, but we just do it slightly differently in previous exercises to what we have done. So for example, you may have P4 divided by P2. Now index law number 2 would say that it would be 4 take 2, and you end up with P to the power of 2. However, this can be reversed. I now could say P2 is divided by P4. As you can see, it's now going to be 2 take 4 because the P2 is now mentioned first, which then ends up being P to the negative 2. So when we're dealing with negative indices, we don't want to have that. We want our indices to always be positive. So when you're in a test situation, you will notice that in the question they will say, please simplify the following index with keeping an index laws with a positive indice. When we have been doing scenarios like P2 over P4, which is the same as division, you would simply have put a 1 at the top and had the P2 at the bottom. Notice that that now is a positive 2 because we've kept it at the bottom of our fraction. So this is what the law is now looking at. When you end up with a negative, we need to convert it into a fraction to remove the negative indice. So if we have a look at example number 14a, x squared, we want it to become x squared without the negative. So it now is going to change to be 1 and x squared. So we've changed it to a fraction to remove that negative indice. Let's have a look at b. This one's a little bit more complicated because you've got to remember there are no brackets. So this negative 2 that's sitting with the a is only on the a. So the 3 and the b to the 4 needs to stay where it is, at the top. We draw the fraction line and the a squared now moves to the bottom. That is as simple as this one can go. There is no cancelling out that needs to happen. Therefore, that is your final answer. Make sure you've copied this into your notebook. Now the roles can be reversed, as you can see with example 15. We now have 1 over c to the negative 2. Once again, in order to get rid of that negative, we need to move it now to be at the top of our fraction. So it's going to be c squared over 1. But the 1 at the bottom, when we write it as a fraction, we know from when we were dealing with fractions, we don't need to write that. Therefore, the answer is simply c squared. Having a look at b, we've got x to the negative 3 and y to the negative 5. Both have negative indices. So these are basically just going to do a switcheroo. So you now end up y to the 5 over x to the 3. And that's as simple as it can go. We can't do any cancelling. Getting a little bit harder with part C of example 15. Same scenario as what we looked at example 14b. Y is the only one that has the negative indice. So the 5 is going to stay where it is. The x to the 3 is going to stay where it is. And all that moves is that y to the 4. And it goes to the top to make that a positive. No cancelling needs to happen, and that's as far as you can go. Personally, with negative indices, it's probably best to make them positive before you do any cancelling. You may experience some of these in the questions that I may set for you to do today. Moving on to our final example, example 16. They're asking now for us to express as positive powers only, so that's step number 1. Then you need to evaluate these without using your calculator. So there's 2 steps involved, which means I'm going to be looking for 2 things that are going to be involved with this. So step number 1, remove the negative power. 3 to the negative 4 is now going to become 1 at the top and then 3 to the 4 at the bottom. Step 1 gets you that mark for changing it to a positive indice. They've asked us to evaluate, so we're not going to leave it as an index. So therefore 3 to the 4 is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, which is 81. That is now your final answer. Moving on to B. This is the part where some students get a little bit confused. Notice that we have a negative 5, but the negative 5 is at the top. It's not a negative indice, it's just a negative number. We're only moving things that have a negative indice. So in this scenario, we have 3 to the power of negative 2. Because it's at the bottom, it's going to be moving to the top to join our negative 5. Now when it's joining our negative 5, we're multiplying 3 to the power of 2. Obviously everything's now over 1, but I don't need to write that. It's negative 5 times 3 squared. Negative 5 times 9. Negative 5 times 9 is negative 45, and that becomes your final answer. Part C. We've got the fractions, and now we're putting into place one of our index laws, where we've got, I think it's index law number 4, where the negative 4 is going to join the 2 and the 3. So step number 1 in this scenario is you actually need to get rid of the brackets first. So you're applying a first index law that we've already learnt. Now we're going to apply this index law with negative indices. To get them to be both positive, they need to do the swap around. So it's 3 to the 4 at the top and now 2 to the 4 at the bottom. You evaluate each of those and you end up with 81 over 16. Be really careful when you're dealing with negative numbers or negative indices. Know the difference between the two. I would highly recommend that you write each step down in this scenario to avoid making those silly mistakes in a test situation. Remember, this is probably each of these questions were worth 2 marks each because they asked us to first express it in a positive power, then evaluate. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me and we can discuss this further. But hopefully you're feeling very comfortable with negative indices.